Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for this project, but if we did, today's interview, the second of three interviews with Elizabeth Alley, would be brought to you by Finding Your People. This episode, Elizabeth talks about finding her people. It's one of my favorite things about doing these interviews. This interview with Elizabeth Alley was recorded on July 19th, 2025. Enjoy the interview. All right, let's get you plugged in and ready to
act
go.
Like I know how to
I know.
do this myself. Is this like a left-right situation?
Maybe. I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't see.
Does it have a right and a left?
I don't see that. I don't see it.
I don't think so. I think the main thing is to make sure you got this dude jacked up, jacked down,
Okay.
according to your head size.
Right, because last time they kept falling off.
Yeah, and then make sure it's on the top of your head. There you go. How's that?
Fine, I guess.
We're like kids from the dark ages that suddenly find themselves in the magical world of 2025.
Right. I feel like we need just one of those tape, and it was just the tape.
With the two buttons where you have to press the orange one that's inside the other one.
Right.
Okay.
I was listening to a cassette tape. I still had a jam box.
Nice.
And a friend of ours gave us a cassette tape of he and Toby were in a band together a million years ago. And so I was like, pull out my jam box, start listening to it. Could not remember on the tape, like what was rewound, like where the start was. Is the start where you have all of the tape, or is is tape on this side or is tape on this side?
Yeah, all of those things that we used to know that we don't anymore.
I couldn't believe I couldn't remember it anymore. Anyway, it was fun. But then I realized the tape deck wasn't working because it got all wobbly. So I pulled out the two other cassettes I still have, and they were just as exactly the same kind of wobbly. So it was the tape deck.
The machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that was great. You totally gave me levels and all of the things.
Okay, great. And I'm like,
You're perfect.
okay, cool.
And then if we need to move it, we can move it.
Yeah.
And then if we need to take a break, we can take a break.
Cool.
Okay. Last time we finished. Oh, wait, hang on.
Previously on.
So today is. What is today? Today is Saturday, July 19th. We're here with Elizabeth Alley in the Memphis Listening Lab. Okay, so previously on, we got to the point where you were at your graduation.
Yes.
Or you had sort of finished with the senior show, and we had sung the accolades of the great Bonnie Beaver, although we could have gone on for a really long time about how great Bonnie Beaver is.
Yeah. But this time I wanted to go back for a moment and mention Bob Lewis, who was at U of M at that time teaching photography. He's an amazing photographer. And he taught a professional practices class that was super good. It was, I learned so much. And also the people that we talked to, kind of changed the direction of my life a little bit, because we had to go out and talk to all these, people in the art world in Memphis, which at the time was really hard because, it's just it's not something that you normally did, right? And that age to have to go just talk to people about their profession, that you don't, like a cold call. But of course, everybody in the Memphis art community is and always has been amazing. And I can't remember how I got to this person, but I ended up talking to Peter Bowman. You remember Peter Bowman? He was teaching at the time at MUS. He was the art teacher there. And so I was talking to him in terms of him basically having a day job. And he told me that like the way that you handle like working or just how you're going to be an artist after you graduate, you know, when you're in the real world. And, you know, if that means having a day job or working a bunch of different jobs, is really about your own temperament. And I knew that my temperament was that I needed to have the stability of a full-time job. So I feel like he gave me permission to do that. So I've always like credited him with like making me feel comfortable with that decision, because I'd had like, you know, economic instability for too long to continue to do that once I had loans to pay off. So then I kind of decided that, okay, that's what I was going to do. I was going to find a full-time job. And then the other person, or he brought in a lot of people, but another person that he brought in was David Lusk, who at the time was Ledbetter Lusk Gallery. And he mentioned while he was talking to us in that class that they were hiring at the gallery. And so I took like way too long to call him about it, because again, just that time of life and cold calling people. And so I called him to ask if he was still hiring, and no, he wasn't, but he said that I could do an internship there. And that led on to a lot of other things.
I like that. Now, we have not had, or I have not had a lot of people talk about Bob Lewis yet. And Bob was somebody, I never had him for a class. The only way I really knew Bob was that he was my mom's boss. My mom was his administrative assistant.
Yeah.
And she really loved him and was very fond of him. And everything I've heard from members of the faculty who were there during Bob's tenure as the chair were really, they really enjoyed working with him. They were very appreciative of his skills as a leader. Will you talk a little bit more about that class? Because, I mean, for sure, that class is one that, as someone who teaches it, we treat it really seriously, and we want to make sure that the students do not go off into the world feeling like they've been thrown to the wolves, even though they are being thrown to the wolves.
Yeah.
Like, talk a little bit more about that class. I'm super interested in how Bob ran it.
We talked about all of the things that you needed as an artist at that time, which was a resume, an artist statement, slides, and how to really, I mean, like the real nuts and bolts of like how to write a resume and what to include and how to list your artwork and things like that. But then also talking about your art, talking to other people about it, talking to other art people about the art world in general. You know, it was almost as much about talking to people as it was about, and also getting their stories as it was about those nuts and bolts things. So those, of course, those two people stand out to me the most because of the impact that they had. But it was just a really good class that I learned a lot in, and I've told people about it over the years, and people who weren't at U of M at that time were like, I wish I had had that. And I wish that for everybody too. I wish everybody had it too, because it kind of set me up to think about like how I would get my art out there after I graduated.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I'm curious what were some of the other people that he brought in? I mean, you were talking about David, and then how was it that you connected with Peter again?
I can't remember exactly how that happened.
Okay.
I know that Bob assigned us people to talk to.
Okay.
So he might have assigned me to talk to Peter Bowman, but Jay Etkin was also in there somewhere. Like, I remember this was when Jay's gallery was at the very corner of Cooper and Young. And I feel like maybe I knew Jay already, and so it was a little less awkward to go talk to him. And he might have pointed me in the direction of Peter, but it's been a long time, so can't really remember.
And so your interaction with Peter, what did you go and visit with him in the studio?
I actually met him at MUS.
Okay.
'Cause I don't know why I can't remember why we did it that way, but he was such an odd, like, and I mean that in a super loving way, an odd man, that it was really kind of refreshing that he's just like this kind of awkward weirdo, because hello, awkward weirdo sitting here. And then later, like, 15 years later, he joined us at Memphis Urban Sketchers, and he came to several of those and just did the most amazing on-site sketches using a gallon-sized Ziploc bag of old markers and pens and highlighters.
Wow.
Just the most amazing sketches.
Well, I mean, my overlaps with Peter were really just sort of brief, like I would see him, like if he were at David Lusk or something when he was showing there. And then later I did a visiting artist residency kind of thing at MUS, and they had his portrait in there, and it was so great. Like, I think the way they made the portrait, his tie was in his coffee, because that was like a thing that would happen. And he had, like, it was like all of the other portraits in there, and that I think the instructors are asked to wear certain things, and he like had all those things on, but he also had like paint all over him, and he was clearly disheveled, and but he was this kind of like really interesting and charming and sincere and generous person.
Very generous,
from what I remember.
Very rumpled, very generous.
Rumpled, that's a good one. Okay, I love how you were thinking about that class and how you wanted to go back to it. Were there any other threads that you wanted to backtrack and sort of check out?
I wanted to talk about that senior show a little bit, because I didn't really talk about the work all that much. And so, it was, I was a painting major, so I had to create some paintings for the senior show. We had a great big senior show class that year. I can't remember who was in it. I mean, it's like chunks of my memory from that time, because of just the stress of getting everything done, just gone. But at the time, I was very interested in two things. One was composition, and the other thing was it's like a thing that I feel like people of that age, when they're kind of at the end of college, kind of do a lot, is where they look into their own families and where they, like, entering into adulthood, where do they fit into, that family, that pattern that they have, their whole lives, but now they're adults, even if, like, the rest of the people in the family don't really realize that for another 15 years. At that time you feel a certain way and you look back. And so that's what I was doing. And at that time, in the late 90s, we would have had a lot of physical photographs, printed out pictures. And I loved those. I loved looking at old ones, but even recent ones. So for that, for imagery for that, I had both. And so I had, like my grandparents all dressed up in the 60s, but also my, one from that same year of my brother holding his first child as a newborn. And I was taking all these art history classes, and I would study for them by making flashcards on 3x5 note cards. So I had all these 3x5 note cards that might have like an artist name or an artwork title or something on it. And so I started using those to crop those photographs, and just really to try to find the best possible composition that would be, interesting to paint, fun to paint, but also might tell a little bit of a story of what's going on in the picture. So in the one of my brother and his baby, you can barely tell it's a baby. It's like a hand and it's like a baby blanket, but just like kind of a little tease of what was going on there. So that's what my show was. It was called Form the Family. So it was about form and also the family. And I made about, I don't know, like 10 paintings, it seemed like a lot. And then we had a show at Martial Arts, and it was huge. It was because it was such a big class, and it was a huge show, and it was really, really fun.
I love how you were talking about the composition. I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about. Mm-hmm. For some people, it's a very intuitive kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And for some people, it's sort of a spur of the moment, sort of they're running and gunning and sort of thinking about, I got to get this down, and finding composition is kind of the thing that a lot of young impatient makers, I think, mm-hmm. don't necessarily spend the time on, mm-hmm. for better or for worse.
Yeah.
But I wonder, what do you think it was? Where do you think that was that came from? Was there a particular...
I think it came just from, when we talked last time, I talked about always keeping a sketchbook mm-hmm. and making a lot of sketches of things that I thought I wanted to make and then never made. So I kind of think that it came from that, from, working in my sketchbook in a way that was where I was planning things. And even though those things, a lot of them never came to fruition, it was the work that I was doing that kind of helped me to focus on composition a bit, because I would, even if it was just like a still life, I would maybe try out different ways of, laying it out, maybe I'd try landscape, maybe I'd try, horizontal, vertical. And so I think I just happened to play around in that way a lot, that where it just came to me kind of naturally as I was taking painting classes at U of M and working with photographs, really. I don't know how the 3x5 note card thing came about, but it was very prevalent in my process for years and years after that.
Well, for me, there's something about that ratio that is mm-hmm. particularly powerful. Mm-hmm. That 3x5. Mm-hmm. There's something about that has a kind of stability. Mm-hmm. It's not ridiculously horizontal. It's not ridiculously vertical. It's not square. It's enough. There's something about that has a kind of rightness for me, mm-hmm. and so I can kind of see how you might. And then also, it's probably also a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Like if you work on these 3x5 things mm-hmm. long enough, it becomes a kind of like default setting and mm-hmm. kind of like a natural thing. But now, are you talking about like taking them and cutting them up and then using them as a way, like almost like a viewfinder kind of thing?
Yeah, kind of like a viewfinder, but I wouldn't cut them up. I would tape them together. So it was 3x5 note cards and masking tape. And so I would, but using it as a viewfinder where I would zero in, focus in, really tight, and then maybe I'd loosen it up and see, and just play with them until I found that sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And then I would do that and sketch at the, like I would sketch the different kind of options until I found one that I felt was worthy to then tape the photo to the 3x5 note cards, and this just make my little, plan there.
Right. And that totally makes me think about, I was teaching at Rhodes, a drawing class, when the first iPhones came out. And mm-hmm. I remember handing all the students, the stupid little viewfinders. And I remember talking to them about finding the spot and what feels good. Mm-hmm. And I remember several of them had the iPhone out. And I remember my brain just said, oh, this is different. This is going to be a thing that's totally different. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about that in terms of thinking about our how we as people who grow up around these machines or who get used to these machines and mm-hmm. using them as a way of finding images. Anyway, that's a total side tangent. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm wondering though, with your work, is that kind of experimentation, it sounds like you're thinking about the composition as a kind of decision making. Mm-hmm. Are you also using it as a way, or were you also using it as a way to think about things differently, like taking the same scene, having it be cropped one way for one piece and then cropped a radically different way for another piece? Or were you more about like deciding on one or the other?
I feel like I did do that somewhere along the way, where I, had the same piece or the same image that I worked in different ways. Because I would use some of the same images over and over. So I'm sure that I did that. I don't know if I did it for that show.
But just in general, like it's a thing that you've done.
Yeah.
All right. So thinking about that show, was there more?
That was it.
That's great. I love how you wanted to go back and think about that again. Now, you were talking about making that shift with David as an intern. Was that immediately following school, or was that during school?
It was. It was the summer after I graduated. Okay. So I started working there. Bob Burdett was the art handler there, and so I mostly worked with him, which was amazing. I learned so much about installing art from Bob. But just like a week or two into it, David introduced me to Carissa Husong, who is his wife and who also needed an intern. So then I started interning for her as well. So that whole entire summer after school, when I was so concerned about getting a job, I instead had 2 unpaid internships. So I would go to the gallery in the morning, and then I would go to Urban Art in the afternoon. Urban Art had just started. It was brand new, and it was just Carissa. And then I started as an intern. And then at the end of that summer, I got hired at Urban Art as, I think, assistant project manager was my title.
Okay, I want to hang out and do a lot of urban art stuff because I know that was really important. But just to back up a tiny little bit with David's, that must have also been very strange / interesting being on the other side of the curtain. Was that, or I'm sorry, was it strange to be on the other side of the curtain?
It was strange in so many ways. It was a really great education about how galleries work, and it was really fun. Like we had a lot of fun, and there was an opening. I want to say it was Frida Ham, but maybe it was Pinckney. I think maybe, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was fun. We had, it was fun to install it. We had the big dinner at Pete and Sam's afterwards. That was like I was like, this is what I want my life to be. I want post-opening dinners at Pete and Sam's forever. It was so much fun. And also being able to see the work so up close and to handle it and wrap it up and, like go out with Bob to hang it in people's homes was just like, it was just amazing. It helped because I need to know things exist, I need to see them. I need to see okay, this is how this thing works. This is how people live with art. This is how people talk about art when it is a financial transaction. This is how, and so it was just a great education for me.
Now, you mentioned Frida Ham. I have to address a little bit of Memphis urban legend. I have heard that with those early Frida Ham shows that they would have a lottery where people would draw numbers and they would be able to come in and get their piece because all of those pieces sold. Do you know anything about this?
What I can tell you that I remember is that we had to put paper. I was there because we had to put paper over the doors while we were installing it so that people wouldn't be standing at the doors to look at the pieces. Now, I can't remember the mechanics of how it worked, but it was, we were mobbed. Yeah.
To me, that is so unbelievably fascinating. That just stuns me. Everything about that stuns me in the most delightful, wonderful way. In no way is my surprise or shock tainted with cynicism or anything. I just love that. To me, the thought of people being so excited and that they're doing this, now I just have to get the confirmation from David that it was actually something. But now
I probably was, because I don't know how else they would have done it.
Now, who else was there at David's at that time? I know
Melissa, whose last name I can't remember.
Young.
Okay.
No, Melissa Young is a friend from Rhodes.
Yeah, that didn't sound right.
Melissa
Lee
Colquitt.
Colquitt had just started, so she was who David hired when he said that he was hiring, and then I was too late for that. Baylor Ledbetter, and I kind of think that was it.
Okay.
I think it was just and then Bob, and that was it.
Great. Okay. Then you make this transition to the Urban Art Commission.
Yes.
Which, and being there at the very beginning of it, P.S., having Carissa come in here is something that I really want to do.
Oh, yeah.
Carissa is probably the busiest person in the whole wide world now. So, okay. So you were there at the very beginning of that. I am super interested to hear how you experienced that.
Well, so I started as an intern, and she really, I mean, it was just her, so she really did need a lot of help. And it was kind of weird, kind of like working for a married couple, because sometimes the gallery needed me and sometimes she needed me, and they would just they would decide. So at the very beginning, we were planning a charrette. It was a brand new word for me. So it was where you bring in people to talk about design, and I can't remember what specifically we were talking about. It was like Memphis in general, public art in general. But it was a big deal, and we had like a bus tour, and we had lunches to plan and things like that. And so, I mean, I just dove in and started doing things. I mean, it's felt very normal to me, because it was like a little by the seat of our pants, and that is just the way that so much of my life had gone up till that point. So I just like dove in and started doing it. And the time, it was housed in what was then the Memphis Arts Council, and it was in a building on Union Extended, and it was, what was her name? The president, Kate something. She was the president for a really long time. Lovely, lovely person. A lot of super nice people working there, like too many in that small space. So as an intern, I was there like half a day every day. The gallery was closed on Monday, so I was probably there all day Monday, and then half days the rest of the week. And just worked really, really hard all summer long, and was absolutely thrilled to get hired at the end of the summer. Christy Jernigan, so she kind of like the whole thing was her idea, I guess, and she was the president of the board at the time. So, I did get to talk to her some. We did get to have like a kind of a front row seat to the building of the Redbird Stadium, which, she and Dean Jernigan were doing. There's, of course, public art involved in that. I don't know where I was going with that.
You were doing great. Now, what would you do? Like when you would go in, I mean, again, this is kind of like behind the curtain.
Yeah.
You were getting a chance to really sort of see how these organizations worked and what it looked like for artists who were involved in this kind of thing. So like what were some of the sort of like nuts and bolts day-to-day activities that you were involved in?
Well, I remember that at first, and maybe like when I was an intern, or maybe when I first started working there full time, we had this collection of slides, and again, I'm talking old school slides, of public art around the country. And so we would try to find like examples of like the kind of thing that you would see in a park, or the kind of thing that if we were going to put some public art in, I don't know, the airport, like what other things, or what things do we have examples of that are like in the, in walkways and things like that. So, I mean, it was great, because then I just got to look at art just all day, putting those things together, because okay, we had the internet at that time, but it wasn't the same thing that it is now. We mostly used it for email, and there wasn't really, just you can Google like, the public art in a walkway and get then ads for walking shoes or something. Right. But you know what I mean. It was a different way of finding that information than it is now, and so we would put together like examples to show different people like in the city, city government or city council. And then all of this was really building up to getting a percent for art, which eventually we did do. I can't remember exactly when that was. But until that happened, and what that means is it's like 1% of the city construction budget went to public art. So we're talking like maybe like $500,000 at a time, a year, maybe less, maybe more. I'm terrible with my numbers, so it could be totally different than that. But I feel pretty confident saying like $400,000, $500,000. But before the percent for art went into effect, we worked with different entities that it was doing that on their own. Like the baseball stadium. It was more than 1%, I'm sure, because it was Christy and Dean Jernigan's baseball stadium, and they were the ones interested in public art, or at least Christy was. And so we worked with them, and we worked with neighborhood organizations. We worked with Cooper Young to put up the Cooper Young, the houses that are on the train trestle over Cooper. And
now, do I remember that was the first? Was that the first project?
It feels like it was. I mean, I think we were working on things, but that was probably like the first big thing that anybody like noticed. It was definitely the first project that I just worked on all the way through. I remember writing helping with the requests for proposals. I remember interviewing people about it. Different artists, different local artists. I remember certain people in the art community telling me that they were mad that we were looking at people outside of Memphis. But then ultimately Jill Turman was selected, and then I helped manage that. So I got to work really closely with her. So she doesn't live in Memphis anymore. She lives in California. She's a metal artist. I mean, obviously, we're talking about the Cooper Young thing. And she had never done anything that big. And we had never done anything that big. And so we were all learning together. And so we had to, we had a contract and, payment plan, and she had to work with a structural engineer, I want to say, and then we worked closely with the city because it was a decommissioned train trestle. Mm-hmm. Now, I also have to say that all of this started before 2001. Mm-hmm. So it was just, we're just putting something on a decommissioned train trestle over a street, no big deal. But after September 11th happened, the insurance situation was very, very different and caused some issues for the neighborhood organization. But it's just something that, that's the thing about working in public art is you don't know what just in the world or in just the city that you're in is going to change in a way that's going to have that kind of an impact. But, this was pre-2001, and so we were just like, I remember Carissa and I one time just went and walked across the overgrown, and like this was when it was still just a unused train trestle. It was all overgrown, and we just like walked on it, and I remember that Jill had to learn, I think she had to like get the help of somebody who was like a math person to get like angles correctly. Also, we worked closely with the neighborhood to like nominate houses, and we wanted to work with Jill to make sure that all that, kind of the whole area was represented, that it wasn't just, like just all the Victorian houses or just all the, but there's, a shotgun house and a Queen Anne and, bungalow. And so it was, it was a really fun project to work on. And then even installing it, I remember getting in like the lift that they were using that was parked in the middle of the street that was not closed down, in the rain, and helping to paint the underside of the structures once they were installed on the trestle.
I mean, to me, the thing that I love about this story is that you're really kind of giving us this glimpse of time. In that time, like here we are in 2025, there is a sort of like an understanding. I mean, Urban Art Commission is sort of a large oiled machine at this point. There are, I don't know how many project overseers they have. I think it might be like 4 or 5. And then they have 2 other people. And it's this like big thing. And then also there's a path, a prescribed understanding of the path. I mean, really at this time, there weren't very many public art things in town that were not statues,
right.
In the classical sense, like monuments kind of thing. But then also that project with Cooper Young was like this thing where it was awesome in that it kind of became the identity of that institution, or one of the many markers of that institution. Like it became its thing, which to me is sort of a shining success in terms of dealing with that. But then also, I would imagine at that time, explaining, I mean, I know that a big part of the UAC mission, or a big part of their bandwidth, is spent just trying to convince people that it's important, and I would imagine that task would be even more daunting at the very beginning of its history. And that must have been something that you and Carissa were particularly in tune with.
Yes. It helped that Christy Jernigan kind of started it, and was the champion of it. Because she was just, at the time, she was just really influential in Memphis. And Carissa also approached it with such confidence in what, in the benefits of it, what it would bring for Memphis, that I think like the two of them together really made that task less daunting. Because they were both really influential, and they both did a really great job with that. The Cooper Young trestle was not only like, it helped us to like really like show like this is, we can do this here in Memphis, but it also was kind of just an impressive thing around, like, as far as public art around the country, because it is over a road and it does depict the neighborhood, but it also doesn't read like a welcome sign. It does read as art. And I remember that in the summer of 2001, and I can't remember when I can't remember when it was finished, but I know it was finished by the summer of 2001 because we went to a public art conference and showed it as one of the, just completed projects. And I just, I still remember like the oohs and ahs from the audience, because at that point, Shannon Dixon had joined us as a project manager. So that's how I got to know Shannon. So that was, she started in February of 2001, and we just immediately became friends. And so she and I were actually at that public art conference. And I just remember us like looking at each other like, that's us, like when everybody saw the picture and was just very impressed with it. It was really fun.
No, I mean, at the very beginning, you were just talking about how it was you and Carissa, and then suddenly Shannon's there. Was this a time of great growth and expansion for the organization, or were you guys still pretty bare bones?
No, it was constantly expanding because again, Carissa was able to bring other organizations in on the, on public art and the benefits of it. So I kind of think that, if I'm remembering it correctly, Shannon was hired specifically to work on public art in the schools. And I don't remember the timeline of that, but eventually we were using a percentage of, this was at the time Memphis City Schools construction budget on public art in schools. So she worked on some, and then after she left, I worked on several as well, because I was there for a little over 11 years. So September of 98 to, I want to say, like March of 2010. Yeah.
Now, and then in that time, you guys changed locations and went from that place on Union Extended to downtown. Was that right?
Yes. So that was, that would have been like in 2000, I think, or maybe even 99. So yeah, the Arts Council moved from Union Extended to the building at the corner of 3rd and Madison, the southeast corner. It's a hotel now. And so we were on the 3rd floor, and we had the whole 3rd floor, and it was so big and nice, and we had views out the windows, and we could walk to any kind of food place you can imagine. And so Urban Art, we had our own little office. So it was 2 desks, Carissa and me, and then Shannon joined. So then it was 3 desks in one little office. It felt very much like a dorm room at that time, but it was great. And then also, one of the things that I worked on there was they installed a hanging system in the lobby and the conference room. So I brought in artists and organized shows there. So that was like a really fun part of my job, because I really loved doing that. So I worked with, I shouldn't have tried to start naming people's names. Because I can't, I'm just so bad at remembering people's names anymore. But that was really fun. We did a bunch of those, and it was really fun. Another really fun thing that I did was I worked with the Shelby County Mayor's office to install art in their lobby. Like, I think it was like once a quarter, I would change it out. And so I would just I just had almost complete control. I would develop a theme. I would go to like galleries and be like, can I borrow this person's art for 3 months? Or to individual artists. And then I would haul it all up I would park in the garage, haul it all up the elevator, install all of it. Anytime we had an intern, I'd have them help me with it. And I would meet with, it was Jim Rout at the time, and Tom, he does Smart City now, Tom Jones. And just like 2 very, very nice, pleasant men. It was just like, I basically had to show them like what my idea was. And they're always like, that's fine. Let's talk about other stuff now. And Tom Jones would talk about Bob Dylan. And it was just like, it was just one of those weird things where I'm like, okay, now I'm in this situation with the county mayor hanging out talking about Bob Dylan. But that was really fun. And it just like, it kept up my use of what I learned from Bob Burdett about hanging art. And it was always fun to like get out of the office and go do things with art, which was one really fun thing about this job.
And then talk a little bit more about working with Carissa. I was telling you earlier that I want to get her in here, but I'm curious. Carissa is such a powerhouse and such a instrumental force in the forming, if I remember right, of Urban Art Commission, and then also the transformation at the Metal Museum. Talk to me a little bit about working with her.
I learned so much from her, just about, just like being an arts professional, and interacting with people, and how you talk about art, and how you talk about really the benefits, like what's in it, like the value, I guess, is really the word I need there, is the value of it. She was always so on message about that. So that was, so I just learned so much from her about that. And, she was kind of a perfectionist. So we worked really hard. But also there was a lot of like that's one thing about the art world, is that there's also always the social side of it, where we would meet people for lunches, or we would go to, some kind of opening or some kind of reception. So it was really interesting to see, to see both sides of it that way, to be a person who is working at a social event, like in a networking way, but also we were putting on social events. We had all kinds of, artist talks, or like unveilings of things. So just learned a lot from her about kind of like how to be at those, in those situations, at those places. Also, she got me started public speaking, because she said, we need to present to this group. I think that you should do it. Do you want to do it? And I said, no. And then she was like, wrong answer. I was like, but you asked. But I did it, and I didn't die. And now, 25 years later, I really actually enjoy public speaking. And I did it a lot. Like, I ended up doing it just so much with that job, so much talking to, to classes at U of M and MCA, to neighborhood groups, business organizations. I traveled to like APSU and gave a talk there. So that was one thing that she also did. And also writing definitely helped me to become a better writer, because we were constantly writing. Press releases, letters, and I mean physical letters to different organizations, different people, different artists. We also interviewed so many artists. Like, we interviewed Mel Chin. We interviewed Vito Acconci. I don't think we necessarily interviewed, but we worked with Vito Acconci. Like, all these big names, big people. All of that, I learned by watching her, really, and by doing it.
I love how you were talking about how that job required for you to do these things that were way outside of your comfort zone, and how you were able to sort of adapt and sort of make these changes. Was that one of those things where it was kind of an easy thing, like once you decided to do it, or was there a sort of a rocky learning curve involved?
Oh, everything had a rocky learning curve. I mean, absolutely everything. I would just like, yeah, everything was a big learning curve. Because I didn't want to have to speak publicly, but I did, and I got better at it the more I did it. I mean, obviously, that's how that kind of thing works. Like, it's one of those things that you can only learn to do by doing it. And so I did, and eventually, like I always like to say when I'm talking about public speaking, I eventually, in 2016, gave a short speech to like 400 people in the Manchester City Hall in Manchester, England. So it's like, eventually I got good at it.
Now, I mean, also one of the things I'm thinking about with Urban Art Commission is that it's an organization. We were talking a little bit before about how it was really sort of inventing the boat, or whatever that wonderful expression is, like building the boat while it's sailing.
Yeah.
There's this like constant adjustment and adapting and making it bigger and making it stronger and making it work better. I mean, one of the things I remember really early on was you were talking about people were sort of grumpy, angry, disgruntled about not having local people involved. And I mean, I can't remember the date, I think it was after I came back from Iowa, and there was like a town hall meeting at the Civil Rights Museum. And it really was just this like brutal grilling. And it was a thing where I think it was like Carissa, and you might have been on stage too, but it was like Carissa on stage, and like everybody was irate. And it was this thing where I could totally tell that it was both a really wonderful time, difficult time for Carissa to explain the difficulties of having local people involved in $100,000 projects or $50,000 projects when they had never done one.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, you know, Urban Art Commission for me, as an outside observer, was very instructive, or made this really wonderful shift where so much of their job at that point also became outreach to the artists in the community to be able to provide, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you do a call for interest or whatever that thing is called. And this is how you do a proposal. This is how you do a project. These are the things that you need to use. You were obviously there for a lot of that. And I'm super curious how it worked on the inside for you guys, again, to be building this boat while it's going in this city with very limited experience with public art.
Yeah, that was hard. And we were just always trying to think about about outreach, like about how can we, like, because so much of our focus was like the city and the business side of it. And then we were like, well, we need outreach to artists as well. And how do we do that? And so we did like several of those. We did like a whole series at different times. And I think that what eventually helped was when when we got Percent for Art, and the way that we worked became more kind of standardized. Because in the early days, there were projects where artists were handpicked, like the Cannon Center. You know, Vito Conchi isn't applying for a call. I mean, and I think those artists were selected before I can't remember how that selection worked, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that that's where artists had issues, where like, okay, you're starting this thing, and then the first, 5 people you're picking are, I mean, they're big names, but they're not from here. They don't, like, what do they know about what we're doing? Now, Doll Smith and Kay Lindsay did a piece for the Cannon Center also. That was big and amazing.
And if I remember right, John Salvest
had
those great pieces in the bathroom,
yes.
the toilet paper, and then if I remember right, Terry Jones did the donor wall.
Right.
Yeah, and there may have been a suspended piece in the space.
Suspended piece was by a guy named Ed Carpenter, and maybe there's also a suspended piece at the library. That might be Ed Carpenter. I might be getting the two confused. But there is a suspended piece. And I was just using the Cannon Center as an example of, like, why local artists might have been like, hey, but also, the public library, the central library. So I believe that some of those people were handpicked, but there were local artists involved as well. And gosh, that was 25 years ago. That building is 25 years old.
Yeah.
It opened in 2000.
Well, I mean, for me, that space is so great because it has that Nancy Cheers space with the children's area, and then it has the animals on the outside in that little area, and then it has the Pinckney Herbert and the Alonzo Davis collaboration with the Terrazzo. And then you were working there when there was the hubbub, which could totally be like a Netflix documentary all on its own, like that sort of like, I mean, will you tell the story of the hubbub?
Yes. I mean, it just like is a good illustration of how Brent Taylor has always been a pain in the ass in Memphis, because it was Brent Taylor, and I'm sure some other city council people or county people. So, okay, the piece in front of the Central Library was done by two guys, one of whom's named Brad. I'm sorry that I can't remember anybody's name anymore. They were from, I want to say, Denver, and they did projects with where they would laser cut imagery, text into stone. So they have these big marble columns, and the whole thing is like, I mean, it's like a monument to information, to learning. So there's binary code on it. There's hieroglyphs, there's space information, all this stuff. And in all this huge, I mean, because there are like 5 pillars and there are walkways that span the entire front of the building, okay? Well, one tiny piece of information was Workers of the World Unite. And
I mean, this is when you're sort of talking about the space, there are probably at least 1,000 square feet of text involved in this piece. I mean, It is sprawling, and then it also becomes this 3-dimensional thing with the columns. And so, like, there are probably, I would bet, at least 1,000 quotes or at least 1,000 kinds of information.
Yeah. Quotes, imagery.
It's like a Dr. Seuss quote.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. And
by the way, I love how totally reserved and how totally like calm and collected you are about talking about this, because like when I tell people that story, I am just like raving. I become like a raving lunatic. So I really admire you sort of keeping the blood pressure low for this part.
oh my gosh, it was it was just so dumb. I mean, Brent Taylor was out there with, the local news saying, this says Workers of the, like, I don't even, like, now 2025, like what was he like? I can't even like fathom what the issue.
Well, they had, if I remember right, again, I'm going to
turn I went the outside view
into a raving lunatic. If I remember right, they had like prayer groups out there, and if I remember right, there might have also been like a Darwin quote in there somewhere, and I think people got kind of bunched up about that and its connection to evolution. But like, if I remember right, there were like legit council-led prayer circles out in front of the library, and it became one of those things like in the newspaper where it would have like the people's pictures, and it would be like, well, what do you think about the Memphis Library? And then one person would be like, it's horrible, I hate it, and another person would be like, it's the library, or whatever. But it would be this like, and I remember it was like, it was on the news, I mean, it wasn't just like in the newspaper. It was like one of the main stories. And anyway.
Yeah. So we had a lot to deal with there. It will not surprise you to hear me say that I don't remember everything from that, because it was a long time ago, and B, just something that was not really worth remembering because it was so dumb. It was just, and we had a few things like that. There was another thing, and I can't remember what project it was, but Christy Jernigan called me at home, because again, a long time ago, I had a home phone number. I had a home phone. Kids, that means there was a phone just connected to the wall in my house. To say, like, call all the artists and tell, and like, we need this message out about something. And I'm sorry that I can't remember what that one was, but it was like, there were a lot of things like that. There were a lot of things where city council, got their panties in a bunch, or, local artists did at times as well, or, some neighborhood folks. I remember some screaming and yelling fights in project meetings. There was way more yelling involved in behind the scenes public art than you would think.
Well, I mean, it is such and one of the things I really love about talking to you about urban art is that in like your peek behind the curtain at David Lusk is a kind of peek behind the curtain, but like the peek behind the curtain, I really wish that anybody who had anything critical to say about any public art project could just be given, like a 3-minute YouTube video of all of the things that have to happen, that need to happen in order to have a project come off and be done. And then also for people to understand the timeline, the glacial pace of some of these projects. I mean, one of the things that I think is really powerful about that is that I think for a lot of people that work at urban art, it sort of mimics that sort of slow coming together of an idea, so like for a curator, maybe it's a show, or maybe for an artist, it's a piece, but there's a kind of like slow thing that happens where it slowly becomes this living, breathing thing, and it's out there in the world, and you've done this work to make it happen. It is so complicated, and so sometimes headbutting against a wall to get something done.
Yeah. And then, and it ends up in this amazing piece. But one of the drawbacks of public art is that it is rarely taken care of as well as it should be. And so we were talking about the library. For instance, the piece that you mentioned by Pinckney Herbert and Alonzo Davis, those are two names I remember, is absolutely gorgeous. It was a feat. What it is a huge terrazzo depiction of a painting that the two of them created together. So they specifically created this painting to go in this space, and then I worked with them on the whole process, working with the terrazzo people, finding the colors, narrowing down the colors, because they wanted like all the colors, and we're like, guys, we can only afford this many colors. And it is absolutely beautiful. And it is always covered in rugs because Memphis gets so much rain. It is always wet here. So why the architects called for slippery terrazzo in the entrance of a public building in a city where it rains all the time, I do not know. But as a result, it is always covered in non-slip mats because people have fallen. So that's really not a good illustration of it not being taken care of. It's being taken care of by people, making sure that people don't fall on it. But it makes me mad that that it even happened that way in the first place, because it is a beautiful piece that nobody ever sees. So there are a lot of pieces like that end up in a public place that is just like beat up with use. And the people who work there, they don't have time to take care of public art. It's not on them. And I'm not saying that the organization is at fault in any way either. It's really like an overall just universal public art issue, that it is just not, like, once it's put up, it's just not, it's meant to be there for a really long time, and it needs to have that kind of maintenance and care built into it in some way.
So you were working there during that really huge pivotal time in that organization, and watching it grow and watching it shift from this one thing through 2010 is on the other side of
right. Carissa had already left by the time that I left.
Okay.
So I was there for maybe 2 years without her.
Okay. Now, who was it that came in after that?
It was John Whedon.
Okay. So John Whedon came in, and he ran it for 2 years. And now at that time, you guys moved over to Broad Avenue.
Yes. Yeah.
So and that's your third move?
Oh, no, we had way more moves than that, because we started at the Union Avenue Extended, moved in with the Arts Council, who eventually changed their names to Arts Memphis after. And then we moved into the building that Christy, the Redbirds building. Toyota Plaza, I think it was called. We just had some cubicles in there. And we had various, we had another person working with us for a while there. We had various interns. And then we got together with AIA and moved into the ground floor of the same building that that Arts Memphis was in, at 3rd and Madison, and had it built out with a big conference room and like an office for AIA. an office, and then some, like extra desk space. And then also Delta Access had a space in there as well, because Tracy Luritzen Wright also was there working for a time.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Like there's so much movement that is involved in that. Now, I'm curious, thinking about your position there, and I know that a lot of artists have found a lot of satisfaction in working for Urban Art Commission or working to help do public art projects on the logistical end. I'm curious, will you talk a little bit about, I mean, obviously it's a jobby job and you get health insurance or whatever, and that's a part of like how we are rewarded. But I'm curious, what do you think it was about that job, or what were some of the things about that job that were satisfying or fulfilling for your art, or your, not your art, but for your life, for your wholeness?
Well, I loved getting to work with artists. Just being around people, making art, thinking about art, talking about art, having meetings where the subject is art. And even when we were working with engineers and construction people, there was so much drawing in the meetings because people would pull out a pencil and be like, okay, if we did this, and then they would illustrate it with a drawing. And, that's my thing right there. And so I loved seeing that. And then all of the ways that I was, and the times and the venues where I was able to put shows together was just like an unexpected plus. I really loved doing that. I loved thinking up themes and finding work that fits in the themes, and even installing it and just writing about it. And then I would send out press releases, and just getting to help artists in that way, or just in any way that we did, was really, it was very fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, you did that. You said 11 years? Yeah. But talk a little bit more about the organizing of the shows, because, I know that is a very different kind of wrangling, a different kind of itch scratching. Talk a little bit about organizing those shows and what kinds of things you were doing. You were talking about doing things in offices and public spaces.
Well, it was mostly the shows that we organized when the Arts Council first moved into the building at Madison and 3rd. And so did a bunch of really fun shows there. And then the Shelby County Mayor's Office that I mentioned did that for years and years. And I'm trying to think of what else that I did where I did that kind of thing. We had started a movable collection, and so sometimes we would hang art like in the council, like around the city council, or we would go visit places and look for spots, to hang art, maybe libraries or things like that. I drove like all over this town for that whole 11 years, just every little nook and cranny that you can imagine in Memphis, looking for either places to site art or to hang art or to talk to neighborhood groups. I've seen so much of Memphis.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. That's for sure. As you were saying that, I was reminded how often with this project, when I ask questions, I have no idea where they're going to go. And I had never thought about how much you have to really be in touch with all of these different areas, like areas maybe not necessarily that you would visit in your normal everyday life. I would imagine that would give you a much fuller picture of the city than normal people.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So yeah, because I also got to go into people's houses and like their studios. So I got to see, like where people worked and where they lived and how they lived. And Oh gosh, one of the most amazing things that I experienced at Urban Art was working with Orange Mound. We were working on some signs just around the neighborhood to kind of show like the boundaries of Orange Mound. And so like you would know like when you were driving, up into it or through it, because there were some on Park as well. So there's this woman named Mary Mitchell who was like the queen and president of Orange Mound. She had connections to it since she was a child because her family lived there. She didn't live there, but they would take the train from wherever it was she lived to Orange Mound to visit her family. I learned so much about Orange Mound. And one day I was there meeting with her, Beverly Perkins, and one other woman, and they just were telling stories. And just to be able to sit there and hear those stories and just like absorb their whole vibe, just relaxed, just having fun, telling stories. I had actually gotten a speeding ticket on my way to that meeting, and I was like, this is exactly what I needed. I mean, because it was just like taking it slow, no real agenda, just like, it was amazing. It was just one of the most amazing things I've been able to experience as a white woman in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah, sure. I mean, because that's such a glimpse into a neighborhood and a culture. I mean, there's so many different neighborhoods, so many different cultures in this city, for you to be able to get that glimpse in there, but then also for you to be a kind of arts ambassador in some of these spaces, like we were talking about before, about how, there's always this question like, well, why would we spend money on art and not on our schools, or not on the roads, or not in this other thing? Like, what is it that's going to do? I would imagine that a huge part of, and then probably a huge satisfaction for you too, as a part of that, is seeing that project come to life, having it exist in that space, and then having it sometimes be like a reflection of that environment, and how it can be ingrained into the identity of that space.
Yeah, and then what was even better was that when we had when they built the Orange Mound Community Center, we already had connections in that community, and we were able to work with Mary Mitchell again. And Vitus Shell was selected for that, and he worked closely with the neighborhood, and that is one of my favorite projects. I mean, it's an amazing project. Vitus did an amazing job. Everybody there was just so into it, just so like excited about it. And it was really nice to have some of the projects that we did were totally like no pressure like that. They were just like, we've got this money from the city. They want art. They just found the perfect artist for it. Like everything connected really well. But it was so nice to already have that connection with Mary Mitchell and with Orange Mound to get in there and be able to work on this just super successful project.
Now, I know that, we just sort of went from late 90s to 2010, and it was this like very quick thing, mostly talking about Urban Art Commission, but also during this whole time, you're also active in the arts community in a lot of other ways as a maker. Talk a little bit about some things that were happening with you in the studio world.
Well, okay, so backing it up to that summer that I was doing two internships, I was like, I remember that I had like, art books, and I was just like copying. Like I would just go through art books every day and just copy into my sketchbook, drawings and paintings and things.
Like what kind of things are you looking at?
I want to say I had like a little book on Van Gogh. I had a book about drawing faces, like a real like classic old school one. I don't remember what else that I would have had at that time, but I mean, I was just picking up whatever I had in the house, and just like that's all I really had time for. And I was out of school. I was excited to be out of school because I could make whatever I wanted, but then I didn't have time. And then once I did start, just working full time, and it was, had more structured days, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I mean, I know that that a lot of people who go to school for art kind of experience this once they're out, because there are no more, because like you're so you're so anxious to get rid of assignments, but then you don't have any more assignments. So then you're like, what do I do? So I ended up giving myself an assignment, and I said, okay, I'm going to make this many paintings, and they're going to be, I just like made some like constraints. I was like, okay, they're going to be this size, whatever imagery I feel like doing, but they're all going to be these same sizes. And they were based off the size of billboards. So billboards are 14 feet by 48 feet. And so I made 14-inch by 48-inch paintings, and then also smaller versions, like scaled down versions of those. And
why billboards?
Why not billboards?
Well, was it one of those things where you were seeing things like through your job? You were thinking about billboards, or were you just sort of like, I like that ratio, that feels good?
Well, it was a combination of those. I mean, I do like that ratio, but part of it is because of movies, like being letterboxed. And so I feel like I have to explain what that is. Like growing up, we would see so many movies. We'd see movies on TV that were cut down to fit the size of the TV, which sounds insane now in 2025, but that's how it was. And so you would miss parts of the movie. And so then, we would later rent movies, and they would be showed at the ratio that the director intended, which is like 16 by something. And so I loved the look and like the feeling of that. And I liked that it was how the person who made it intended it, and so it was, you're seeing like the composition of it, and so when I put it together, they actually called the show Letterboxed, because that's how I thought of those paintings as I thought of them, I guess, more even though they're technically based on billboards, because I called a billboard company. I was like, how big are your billboards? 14 by 48 feet. Thanks, bye. And but yeah, I like that. I like kind of just the feeling of that size.
And what do you think it does? Like, how does that? I mean, obviously, you're someone who really thinks about composition a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would imagine that it would be particularly expansive. Mm-hmm. Anytime you look at something through sort of a fixed ratio, you begin to sort of lay it out differently.
Yeah.
How do you think you were thinking about it differently?
Well, I was definitely thinking about composition and like the challenge of composition in that format, because it's just very long, and it's a long rectangle. And so like, what can you do in a long rectangle that's going to make sense and that's going to hold your eye? And there was like a feeling that I was going for, but I was still so fresh out of school that I didn't always hit the mark on it. But I was very influenced by Summer Avenue. I had forgotten that in Bonnie Beaver's class, I did a whole series in that mixed media way on Summer Avenue. And so I have spent like days and days just driving up and down Summer taking pictures. And there were at the time, and there's still a lot of great old signs, but at the time there were even more. And so I worked a lot with those. So then arranging the composition in a way that you're also looking at like what is happening around the object that you're painting, so that, paying attention to the sky around these signs became a big part of it. But I did people too, and those paintings are still around. Like one of my cousins will occasionally send me a picture of her house with one of those in it, and so I worked on those, and I gave myself like really a whole assignment. Like, I'm going to do this many, and I'm going to be done by this time, and I'm going to have a show. So then I started putting together packets to send to people, about having a show. And so it was literally slides. and, like an introductory letter. And I used everything I learned in Bob Lewis's class. And what I ended up doing was having a show that I got through David Lusk at Theater Memphis. Because it was, they had a kind of a bigger gallery at that time than they do now. And so it was a lot. I mean, like, I had a lot of work and it filled the space. And it was my first show. It was in, I want to say April of 1999, or maybe May of 1999, or maybe it was 2000, but I think it was 99.
Now, I know you were talking about how you like to give yourself, or you have to give yourself.
It had to have been in 2000. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I wanted it to be in 99. It was in 2000.
That's cool. So you're kind of a self-assignment maker.
Yes.
And do you find that is something that you stick with, or is that a place that you or is that a thing that you kind of need to get the ball rolling?
I think it's probably something I need to get the ball. I mean, it's definitely something I need to get the ball rolling. In that case, I definitely stuck with it. I mean, they were all that size. There was no varying from that. I did vary the imagery. And like I said, some of it worked, some of it didn't. But I was really just determined, and I worked all the time. When I wasn't at work, I was in the studio all the time working on that. So it was really, I was really glad I did it. I was glad that I had that to focus on, because I had been doing stuff in the studio between graduating and starting that was just kind of one-off things. And I really work better in a series. And I learned that, in Bonnie Beaver's class and in that senior studio thing. So once I had like a set parameters to work with and making work that really needed to all make sense together, then I was like really way more focused in the studio, and I did the work.
Now, what do you think that working in a series, obviously it works for you, and you were talking about having everything kind of fit together. Mm-hmm. That's one of the benefits of working in a series. What do you think? What are some of the other benefits for you?
I think it all feeds off of, each piece feeds off of the rest of them. Because now the way I work is that I'll work on several at a time. At the time, I really didn't have the space to do that. I probably worked on one at a time, or I probably started several and then worked on, one. And then the next one and the next one. But now it's like everything feeds off of everything else. Mm. So I might resolve something in one piece that will help me in the other piece I'm also working on. Mm. And so they're just kind of related. They just kind of go together. There's I think of them as like buddies or siblings, or like they just belong together. So with that first series, they were, because there was such different imagery, maybe it was really the size that fit them all together. Mm. But after that, it was more like the feel of it and the, and the imagery, because it, maybe it would focus a lot more on people than on places.
Now, so after the show that you had there in 2000, mm-hmm. what else was going on? Because, I know one of the things that's really important, or one of the things that I see as an outsider as being kind of important for you, is your connection to the community as mm-hmm. well. And so I'm curious, what are some other things that are happening in the arts community that were particularly important for you at that time?
Well, one thing that I did was I got together with a group of people to do critiques, basically. Started a critique group. It was Kurt Meir, Alan Duckworth, David, who we were talking about last week. David Phillips. I think it was just the four of us. Okay. And we got together, and I really had missed that in school. Again, another really surprising thing about being out of school was missing that part of it. So I did that, and then There were also just throughout those 10, 12 years, there were different groups and kind of group shows like Nia Collective was going on at that time, and I was in several of their group shows. I mean, I wasn't part of Nia Collective, but they would have big group shows of Memphis artists, and I was in those. There was this show called Venus, some kind of Venus show. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was a lot of women artists. But at the time, like through not just like participating in group shows, but just going to art openings, which I went to all of them at that time, just meeting so many people. I mean, so many of the friends I have now are just because I met them at art openings. So many of my artist friends. And what else? So
no, wait, before you go on to those, talk a little bit more about this critique group that you had going with Kurt Meir and Alan Duckworth and David Phillips. Was there someone else? Did I miss someone?
No, I think that was it. Okay. I think it was just the four of us.
No, had you graduated with Alan Duckworth? Was he sort of a cohort of yours?
Alan, I think, was there at the same time that I was, but I kind of think that maybe he had stopped going at that point. And then Kurt and Dave I knew from, because we all worked at Bookstar together, you know, way earlier, like 94, 95. And we were all at the time doing figurative work. So that kind of was the thread that tied us together. So we would get together at, somebody was still at U of M because we went to U of M to one of the studios there. And, you know, everybody would bring a work and we'd talk about it, and maybe it was something it was usually something that was in progress. And we did that for, I don't know, maybe about a year. And we had a show at Martial Arts at that time. And we probably also had a show at Perry Nicole because somebody there was involved with Perry Nicole Gallery. And I think that is how I started showing there, maybe. Like we all showed there together. So we had 2 shows together. So it was probably longer than a year that we were together, but it just sort of fizzled, you know, like things like that will just kind of fizzle after a while, and everybody, you know, like, people kind of changing the way that they're working, and then it didn't really fit anymore, and then it was just 2 people, and that didn't make sense. So,
and then also our lives are complicated.
Yeah,
we have, you know, marriages and things like that are going on. So you were talking about working with the 3 of them. I'm curious, how did that, I mean, I know you were saying you were all sort of working sort of figuratively, but I mean, in the same way that I'm curious about like the 6 Points group that's happening now. I'm super interested in how this, you know, group of 4 sort of started hanging out and decided to do this critique thing. Will you talk a little bit about the selection of that, if you can remember it that far back?
I don't really remember. I don't know who I would have been seeing regularly to sort of bring it up. The way that we worked together was very much like a school-based critique. You know, it was really just like, let's look at this person, let's talk about it, let's not be mean, but be constructive. But I want to say it was probably David and I started it. I'm a person who will start things like this, and I have done a lot of just random stuff where I'm like, we're going to do this now, and then we do it. I'm very much a big sister where I'm just like, okay, this is what's happening. And so I imagine it was probably me, but then pulling different people into it. And I think like maybe David suggested Kurt, and Kurt suggested Alan, or just that kind of a thing where it kind of just we rolled it all up together. And then I did forget someone, Adam Shaw. Adam Shaw was part of it as well. And he brought in his like mentor. Who would that have been? Bill Hicks, maybe? And like the very first time, or maybe the second time that we got together, just kind of as like a bonus critique person. Yeah.
Now, what do you think? How do you think that helped?
I think for me, it provided a little bit more structure, and I just like structure. So I gave myself an assignment, I did that, and then I wanted the structure of a critique, of input from other people, just a way to get together and talk about art that wasn't public art. I really had it was, one of the things about working for urban art while I was also getting my own art career off the ground was that it was kind of like I needed a separation. And I would be at work all day helping other people get their art seen and produced and get them paid. And then I would go home and have to also have energy to put into my own work. So having other people to talk to about just paintings of people and not, not a 15-foot sculpture was really nice. And apparently I needed that a lot during that time.
And then also, I mean, I would imagine accountability, and then also
yeah.
kind of like the peer pressure, or not peer pressure, but then there's also kind of like a fun, empowering kind of thing that happens when you work on a thing with other people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you mentioned Nia.
Yeah.
For sure. I want to spend a little time with Perry Nicole at some point, but thinking about Nia, I'm super interested. I haven't had a lot of conversations about Nia. How do you remember that organization?
Well, it was Frank Robinson, Vitus Shell, Lester Merriweather, Shalisha Franklin, who I called Petey, probably Edwin McBain. I hope I have his last name right. And I worked with them, with a lot of that group on the Dave Wells Community Center through Urban Art. And they kind of each had an area because it was a building that had a lot of big rectangles available. And so, like several of them did pieces around the building. And that was another project where it was just like fun and easy because they were just really easy to work with. Very professional, but also very just really became a part of the community. And I had worked with Lester on something and Vitus on something, and so they put together a lot of shows of their, of their work, and then they would put on bigger shows where they, where more Memphis artists would be included.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I remember there was just this huge sort of buzz of activity around them, and how excited and interesting and motivated they were in terms of getting the work together, but then also providing support for one another and encouragement and opportunities for one another.
Yeah, I loved seeing that. I mean, it's just one of the, just an illustration of the Memphis art community where, there are these pockets that are just so like, it's supportive in general, but I think that helps these pockets kind of develop and grow where there's, like a concentrated, support, but then like their energy like infuses the whole art community. Yeah, that's really what that felt like with Nia Collective.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned working with Perry Nicole. Talk to me a little bit about Perry Nicole, your experience with them. So David
Smith and Nicole Haney.
Right.
Those are two more names I remember. They had this great little gallery at Chickasaw Oaks Plaza, and showed my work for several years. Really, the whole time they were there, I think, as we know, once I got in with them through that group, and they put me together more than once with Susan Makastad's work, which was always like a really interesting pairing. I thought our worked really well together, and then I had several shows there. So that was really nice in that first kind of, let's say, 12 years after. I can't remember when they closed, but it might have been like 2008, 2009. So let's say 10 years out of school to, to be connected with a gallery where I had a show, for let's say 6 years, I had a show every 2 years, and was also in group shows. And that was pretty great. That was pretty amazing.
Now talk a little bit more about working with them and maybe their mission, because if I remember right, they had sort of a particular idea of how they wanted the gallery to be.
I really don't remember that. I remember working with them just, as the gallery owners, and it was also interesting because I worked with them through Urban Art too, because I would put together those shows at the county mayor's office, and so I'd get work from them. So I kind of worked with them in different capacities, and might have even, I think that one or both of them had worked at Alber's Gallery. Do you remember Kathy Alber's Gallery? I mean, of course you do. And so I think that I actually knew them from then. Actually, David Phillips worked there too. And then, so that was kind of interesting too, to see these two people start their own thing. And I don't know what else. I'm at a loss there. I can't remember where I was going with that.
That's totally good. No, talk to me a little bit about, you were saying that your work worked particularly well with Susan Makestad. Talk to me about that combo. What do you think it was about the two of you that worked really well?
Her work has this very cool feeling to it. It's just very spare and very thought out, just a real emphasis on composition. And my work was striving to be cool and spare. And so I would do work at that time that was always a combination of built environment and the figure. So there was always a little bit of both of those things. So it's it wasn't too much built environment where it would sort of clash with her parking lot, kind of traffic cam work. And then the figurative work that I was doing was really becoming more spare. And so I think that it kind of had the same, sort of the same sort of feeling. Hers were more muted colors, mine were brighter, but I think the vibe was similar.
Yeah, I mean, I remember those shows being really good. I also remember or know that it's really hard to find another artist where the two of you click, where it isn't a kind of a clear sort of competition, or not competition, but a comparison.
Yeah.
And then also to have something work in a way that is sort of not discordant is really important, and sometimes a little trickier than we think.
Yeah.
So you were showing with Prairie Nicole, and then you were also, obviously doing the work that you were doing with Urban Art Commission. At what point does Urban Sketchers come into play? I can't remember where that is on the timeline.
2010.
Okay.
So, I left Urban Art in early 2010 and started a just totally new career as a technical writer. It was just time for a change because, I'd been doing that a long time, and I was just mentioning kind of the strain on making my own work. So I wanted something that wasn't art related so that I could save the art part of my brain for making my own work. So, and then I happened to that same year come across Urban Sketchers online. And it was, I think they had a blog, and it started on Flickr in 2008 or 2009 as a just collection of people who like to sketch out in the world, and this was a way to showcase that. So,
and then just because we're talking about art in Memphis, we should say Flickr is the name of a street. Flicker is the name of a street in Memphis, but Flickr is something totally different.
Yeah, and so it was a photo sharing site but you could basically like store your photos, but you could also share your photos. So Gabby Campanario is a journalist in Seattle, and he started it on Flickr. And then they had a blog, and I saw the blog, and I was like, but this is what I do. Like, I didn't even know that other people were out there, just carrying a sketchbook and drawing, light poles and buildings and cars. And so I started following them, and then they advertised that they were having a symposium in Portland, Oregon in July of 2010. And I literally had this thought, oh, I wish I could go to something like that. And then I had this thought, I am an adult with a job. I can do that. I can do that. So I registered for it and went to it just by myself, flew to Portland, Oregon, and went. And the very first morning, it was like we're all together at PNCA, which is Pacific Northwest College of Art, and just there are all these people that I'd like seen on the blog, and was really excited to see in person. And Gabby gets up and starts talking, and everybody has a sketchbook in their lap. And I was like, oh, I can just like, these are my people. Like, because I always wanted to do that, but I was always like hiding my sketchbook because I was like, is this rude? I don't know if, but to be in a room where everybody is doing that, I was like, these are my people. So that was like an amazing 3 days. And I came back and immediately started a chapter here. So Urban Sketchers is a global organization that focuses on like sharing and education of sketching or, drawing on location. And at that time, I think that they were just like, maybe they had just gotten their 401, whatever nonprofit. So they were a nonprofit in the U.S., but it's a global organization. And so one of the things you could do is start your own chapter in your own city. So I immediately came back September 2010, started Memphis Urban Sketchers. And so since I was then an administrator of a chapter, I was eligible to be on their board. So then I got on their board. And then the next year, I think a small group of us helped sort of reorganize the board. And then I was on their executive board. And I did not go to the next symposium, which was 2011 in Lisbon, but the one after that was in Santo Domingo in 2012. And I started like their sponsorship effort. I was like, maybe we could ask, like Dick Blick to give us some stuff or give us some money. And then like we could do these levels like gold, silver, bronze or whatever. So I started that, and we got all of these free things for like goodie bags and money, which was nice. And then I did that again the next year. And then I think the year after that, and then at some point I started just being like the main symposium like organizer, and also I became the president. And so for like a whole year I was doing both at the same time, or maybe 2 years. But I eventually was the president of the organization for like 2 years.
Now, just to back up a little bit, so that first one that you went to there in Portland, 3-day symposium, give us a little insight, or give me a little insight in terms of what happens during that 3 days.
So it's a symposium, so it's like a learning sort of a thing. So there are workshops that you had to sign up for in advance. So I signed up for one like with I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to her name in a minute. Veronica Lawler, that's her name. And because her work really kind of pushed me over the edge into wanting to go, because she published a book about like with sketches that she made on 9/11, because she was in New York. She was heading downtown when the first tower was hit. And she, of course, had her sketching stuff with her and just made these like immediate on-site sketches of like people's reactions of the smoke. I mean, it was I mean, amazing. So I definitely like signed up for her workshop. So it was a people sketching workshop, and we went to that big bookstore there. I think it's called Powell's, to draw people. And I, like I've been sketching, since I was a kid, and I was very used to it. But all of a sudden it felt different. It felt like there needed to be a purpose for, whatever I was sketching. So I kind of made a few, not great sketches. And then I was like, Ronnie, what is this? What else do I do with this? Like, what is this for? And so I started kind of exploring like how to build out a sketch and to make it about more than just having a few minutes to scratch out, like the shape of this person. Maybe it's, not just the person, but the setting. And maybe I switch up the materials a little bit just to, differentiate the background or something like that. So just started to learn kind of more about expanding what sketching was going to be for me. And so there were several of those workshops that I took. I took one from a guy named Matt Bream, and we were sketching like architect. I think it was like an architecture kind of, perspective kind of a thing. And what else? Drew one of the bridges there with this guy named Le Pen, who is an amazing French artist. And just met a lot of just really interesting people. At the end, we all kind of laid our sketchbooks out, and everybody just kind of walked around and looked at them. And then I ended up going out to dinner with a few of these people, and just like, it was just amazing to be around people who were, making sketches just of the world all the time. And some of them were also artists, but some of them were architects, or they were teachers, or they were, one woman owned an art supply store. I mean, it's just like, Gabby was a journalist. It was just like such an interesting collection of people.
Yeah, I mean, just to be around people who are as excited about this thing that has been such a part of your life, it must both be sort of validating, but then also invigorating and even more exciting. Like afterwards, like a huge shot in the arm after, and when you leave. Now, you were talking about eventually becoming a part of the board and being active in it that way. Talk to me a little bit about that. Didn't you have enough to do, Elizabeth Alley?
I did, but as I said, I just like start things or just get into things. I did want to say that that sort of more intense focus on sketching, like I could immediately see how it helped my studio work, which was really nice. Bonus benefit. But so at that first symposium, it was real small. It was like, I don't know, like 70 people maybe. And now it's like hundreds of people. And it was so intimate that I was like I wanted to be like greeting people when they came in, but I'm like, I'm not involved in this in any way. Like, what is that? But it's like, I wanted it. Like, I wanted that thing to be mine. And so eventually it was. Eventually I was in charge of the symposium, and I organized it and worked with a group of people. I mean, like, I'm not in any way saying I did this by myself. We always had these amazing teams that we worked with all over the world. And this was like pre-Zoom. So we would be like on Skype. Working on stuff, some of us at 7 a.m, some of us at midnight. And then, then I became the president. It just kind of worked itself out that way because of how the board was structured. And then I was the vice president, so then I was the president. And I should have let go of the symposium organizing when I became the president, or not became the president and stuck with the symposium organizing. But at that time, that was just very me to be like, oh, I'll just do both of these at the same time. And so I did, and it was a lot, but it was also really fun.
Now, I'm curious, how do you think, or how do you see the Memphis version of the Memphis Urban Sketchers? I'm curious, how do you see them as being particular? Are they different than some of the others?
It's a lot of it is very similar. well, not around the world. For like the Singapore group has like 200 people, and they're very organized, like to like a military degree. So we had a symposium in Singapore, and it was amazing to work with their group because they had this built-in hierarchy, this built-in structure already just for the people volunteering. So we didn't have to like deal with any of that. But here in Memphis, it was kind of like getting people, it's kind of like it took a while to get people used to all this is I'm inviting you to be in this place at this time and put something in your sketchbook and then show it to us afterwards. And and that's like, it's kind of a lot to ask because it's not something that everybody does, and they're not used to people seeing them while they're doing it. And that's like a big thing to get over. So, but basically I would just be like, and I, like whenever I tell people about it, I'm always like, it's really casual. You just show up and you do the thing. And then I say, it's not a cult, I promise, because it always sounds like I'm describing a cult. And maybe in a little way it is, but it really does sound like I'm describing one. But eventually, people did start coming, and like I said, Peter Bowman came for a couple of years there, and sometimes we would do special things, like for the 50th anniversary of the sanitation workers strike. We did a walk where we started, where they started, and then we went to all the different locations and ended up at City Hall and things like that. But it's harder to get our group to do things like that. Like, they like their 2 hours on the first Saturday of every month, but they haven't really been interested in doing more than that. Now, I stopped organizing it in early 2020, pre-pandemic 2020, and Christina Huntington took it over, and it has really grown a lot since then. A lot more people show up now, which is great. And now Martha Kelly is organizing it. But throughout that time, because we're like 15 years old in September of this year, and throughout that time we've had shows, 3 shows: Ask You Nixon Ferguson, the old Crosstown space on Cleveland, and at the Dixon, which was pretty amazing in 2019.
That's a good place to pause. That was our alarm. Mm-hmm. You're such a gem, EA. Like, next time, okay?
Okay, because I haven't even talked about Flicker Street.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Was the second of 3 interviews that I recorded with Elizabeth Alley. That interview was recorded on July 19th, 2025. Please join us next week when we have another interview. Until then, thank you for listening.